South African soldiers remains beleaguered in the DRC, and we have John Stupart, the Daily Mavericks in South Africa's newsletter editor, and he's also a defense analyst with us to try to make sense of what can we expect next on the situation of South African soldiers in the eastern parts of the DRC. Hi, John. It's so nice to speak to you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, good afternoon.
Well, you've chaired a panel this morning on this whole situation. So, what's your take? How dire is it with regard to the soldiers that find themselves in, as well, virtual hostages in Goma and Saké?
Well, actually, just after the recording of that session, we had received some news that it seems like at least the deceased, the 14 dead South Africans plus the four other, it's a mix of Malawans and Tanzanian deceased, are en route back to their respective countries. I speak in correction of that, of course, but that's certainly the latest we found. So that's an encouraging sign. But other than that, really what we've learned is that all eyes will be on the SADC summit tomorrow that is being held, wherein which both the leaders of the DRC and obviously Paul Kagame from Rwanda, ourselves, and pretty much every stakeholder involved in this crisis will be in attendance. So aside from the very awkward handshakes and things like that, I think it'll be very interesting to see what's going to move things forward with this and what's actually going to essentially bring resolution. Because at the moment, those soldiers, ours and other SAMI DRC forces, are effectively still hostages at the pleasure of M23 or Rwandan-backed M23 rebels. Yeah.
Well, while we're on the summit, let's just discuss that. So, this is Ramaphosa would then be facing Kagame after this war of words and a lot of acrimony between the two of them.
Yeah, and if anyone paying attention to social media, and that would notice that Rwanda has absolutely dominated the information space, both in terms of dictating a narrative, however false or otherwise it might be, including some pretty harsh criticisms of President Ramaphosa. In one case, actually, I think it was the foreign minister, again, a stand of correction, but it was someone senior within the Rwandan government accusing Ramaphosa of contradicting his own statement with Paul Kagame. So I think, look, I mean, at this diplomatic level, I think everyone's going to be all smiles and handshakes and hugs. But I think there's definitely a subtext to all this where we as South Africa have received an immensely damaging blow, both militarily and diplomatically. And I think this is going to be a very, very tense set of negotiations, or it certainly ought to be, if the norms of diplomacy apply. Yeah.
This morning, what experts were saying is that South Africa definitely bit off more than it could chew with this whole peace mission.
Yes, and I think that's probably the most disturbing thing of this all is that, from what we understand, the president was warned before the SAMI DRC mission took place, and the chiefs of services were warned before this mission took place that it could not be completed. We could not take the fight to M23 rebels with the force that we had at hand and with the state of the SANDF as it was. Our leaders were warned, and I don't think that they can deny that they ever didn't know that we were not prepared for this. They were warned, and they chose to ignore it anyway and send a vastly under-equipped and undermanned and underprepared force to take on a rebel organization that was only getting stronger, whereas our military presence in the Eastern DRC was only getting weaker. So I think our military forces there have just been completely diminished to the point where this was inevitable. There were going to be lives lost, and we, as defense analysts, collectively speaking, have been banging this drum for years now, that this was going to happen. This is an inevitable conclusion of years and years of the attrition of our defense force. And I think to pretend anything otherwise now is simply just nonsense, to be honest. Certainly, I think from that senior leadership's point of view. So yeah, it was a crisis waiting to happen. Speaking bluntly, I think we're fortunate, we're lucky, sorry, not fortunate, but we are lucky that only 14 soldiers died in this exchange, because from all accounts, it sounded like it was very close in fighting. It was very intense, and our soldiers were fighting almost close quarters there in some instances, from what we've heard. and with very little ammunition, with very little supplies, very few heavy weapons at the disposal, and zero air support. So yeah, I mean, I think we're fortunate. Fewer, more people, more soldiers have not died, but I don't think anyone can pretend that this is a surprise. I think at this point.
Yeah, we heard this morning talk about the situation of the people there. We're talking about the dead who are fortunately coming back now, but that one soldier died because he didn't get the right medical attention.
Yes, that came up this morning. Yeah, you're correct. I mean, and that just seems shocking to my mind, where especially that this happens in the same time space, as I understand things, in the same time space that the Minister of Defense and senior military leadership are there in the region with an aircraft that could have taken several wounded soldiers on board while they were still able to have freedom of movement to some extent. There could have been an extraction. Again, I don't have full knowledge. I stand on correction. Maybe there's a number of mitigating factors. Maybe the luggage in the aircraft took up too much space. I don't know. But from what we see with the available evidence, it seems like that one soldier's death, at least one soldier's death, could have been avoided. Now, I think, we'll see in the coming days. I think there's going to be a lot of information trickling through, especially as those soldiers start to be able to communicate back home and share their stories. We'll start to get a fuller picture of just what these interactions were, when the wounded happened, and how they were wounded, and in terms of their evacuation or lack thereof, whether that was even possible. But I think, yeah, I think we're going to find out some. I'm preparing myself personally for some pretty shocking details, to be honest.
So, what do you think should be on President Ramaphosa's to-do list now? Well, obviously, the first
So,
one is he should start negotiating, which is now taking place at the summit. But what else?
yeah. Uh, yeah, so actually, no, you're right. That should probably be the first one. Second one, fire the Minister of Defense. Third one, fire the Chief of Defense Force. Third one, fire the Chief of Army and Chief of Air Force, and revoke the golf memberships at Copper Leaf for playing golf while soldiers are literally dying. Fire what appeared to be the Sergeant Major of the Army, also at that golf day. And just generally clean house from the military leadership that quite simply failed to lead, and they failed to show any sense of urgency or understanding of this crisis as it was unfolding. And even now, I suspect there seems to be very little conception of just how bad this is for the military and for South Africa in terms of foreign policy, particularly when, if you look at the defense committee meeting, the parliamentary special sitting that happened earlier this week, there seemed to be very little understanding by the minister and chiefs of service of just what's going on there. It appeared that the committee members and the members of parliament had far better ideas or far better understanding of that than they did. So yeah, that would be sort of at the forefront of my list. And then once done, as the president, you convene a new defense review, a proper one. There's sort of a new reconceptualization within the military, but that's nowhere near what needs to be done. There has to be a wholesale rethink of what the military is there for, the South African military specifically, and then fund what that is. If that's a smaller expeditionary force, if we're not even going to have expeditionary capability anymore and just look at sovereign defense in South Africa, whatever that is. And that's going to involve DIRCO. You need to establish what our national security policy is and our foreign policy and all that jazz. We need this entire existential rethink at the cellular level of what the military is for. And it needs to be done yesterday. I don't think you could start that soon enough. So yeah, I think that'd probably be my top 5, 6, 7, or 8 things to get cracking with at the go. I don't realistically think heads are going to roll, to be honest. I'm not sure that the contrition is really there, or even just the understanding of the contrition, let alone any kind of sense of professional shame, I guess. But certainly, if heads are not going to roll, then certainly there needs to be this rethink at the very least of just what is our defense force for, and why, and how do we fund that? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, for our international audience, what is the golf incident? We know it happened on social media, and South Africans are quite outraged by it.
Mm. So, yeah, sorry, actually, I should probably give some clarification on that. So, on the 28th of January, literally while the fighting was still raging on and soldiers were still being attacked, South African soldiers, the Africa Aerospace and Defense exhibition as an organization and the South African Air Force have hosted a golf day at the rather swanky Copperleaf Golf Estate in Centurion. Uh, and what was I actually couldn't believe it when I saw the pictures. I thought this had to have been disinformation from Rwanda. That I could not believe that there would be the chief of army, the chief of South African Air Force, and what seemed to be the sergeant major of the army, as well as some other senior ranking defense force personnel playing golf all day with Air Force helicopters on static and aerial display, while there's zero air support in the Eastern DRC, in Goma, and just being all smiles and happiness, while there's literally probably the biggest crisis since post-apartheid unfolding under their leadership. And I think that just is the most stunning example of complete ignorance to what is important in the military. If this happened in the UK's military, for example, or the US, or virtually any European or NATO member, those leaders would be fired so quickly they wouldn't even be able to take the golf shirts off and have a shower. This just would not be allowed to stand. However, here it's almost like a kind of like fait accompli, that this has just happened and we'll just carry on with it like it's completely normal. So yeah, it's truly shocking. To my mind, it's honestly one of the most jarring events of this entire crisis that just shows how disconnected our military leadership are from the actual rank and file doing the dying, as it were, in far off lands.
So what about the Deputy Minister of Defense, General Bantu Lamisa? Because I watched his face during one of those news conferences. The camera was sort of just caught him, and I mean, you could literally read what he was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, you think I think maybe he was kind of wishing for his own silent death in that committee meeting himself. I think so. The thing is with General Holomisa, he is an experienced individual in terms of military affairs. He has the know-how. He is a very, very militarily knowledgeable individual, and thank goodness the military has him. It is quite obvious, I think, from his expressions while looking at the minister, while she spouted half truths and had just sort of, just weird generalizations about the military that made very little sense. I think General Holomisa was very. I think that was deliberate, and I think it was a deliberate attempt to maybe sort of like create a little bit of distance. And I mean, in a perfect world, as a citizen, as a taxpayer who pays for these salaries, I would certainly love to see Holomisa in charge, because I think things under his watch might see some changes very quickly, and I don't think anybody will bat an eyelid if he's put in charge as minister, because he is a supremely qualified individual, and I think very well suited to it. It's a shame he wasn't minister to start with under the GNU.
Well, can we look at how South Africa is positioning itself globally? With foreign policy, it's quite clear. What does South Africa do? Because might it be tempted? Because clearly it doesn't have the resources to engage in these peacekeeping missions. So, what do you think? How should South Africa position itself globally? Because is there a risk, well, from a Western perspective, that South Africa might say, "Okay, China, help us do this"?
Yeah, I think we're very much in the start of what might be the gravitational shift towards certainly BRICS aligned nations. That's simultaneously due to the US's own belligerence against South Africa, where I think we no longer see ourselves as aligned to a Western military. However, the SNDF has always been, as a doctrine in post-apartheid, certainly, has been aligned with a more sort of NATO mindset. And it's my colleague Darren Willifie at African Affairs Review he put the nail in the head there, where he said, like, this has served us very well. With the NATO style training, equipment, doctrine, and execution, it's made sure that our soldiers in general have remained pretty well trained and pretty capable of fighting disproportionate battles. Even in this crisis, where we've lost 14 soldiers, there are reports of several hundred Rwandan and M23 casualties on the other side of things. So there is there is no doubt that these soldiers, even though we have lost and we were under-equipped and poorly manned there, fought like absolute heroes, and did so very well. So all of that doctrine, I think, we could be seeing a shift away from this purely because there is no longer any kind of pull bringing South Africa there. Now, I would say the task now is forget about the United States. I think they're no longer even a player in South African military foreign policy. But the task is for the EU to now compete against BRICS nations for basically the soul of military doctrine in the South African military. Because absolutely, I mean, what might happen is we get John's wish, right? Like, yeah, now we're doing a military defense review, but oh, now our policy is completely aligned towards Chinese, or God forbid Russian doctrine, which simply would not do us in very good stead for the kind of expeditionary warfare that we seem to be inclined to do as a regional hegemon. So we need to ask ourselves, firstly, do we want to still be a lead actor in these affairs in Africa? And if so, then we need a military that has to punch above its weight. So, one soldier cannot be like for like against other soldiers. We cannot have that kind of mindset, a la Chinese or Russian mindset. We need a small, highly elite and capable force to achieve that. And I think the task now is going to be to try and maintain that identity through, I would guess, through those NATO powers that we've always been influenced and aligned with, and try and maintain that. And I think that's a very, it's an interesting question you ask, because I think that's actually going to be the identity crisis that's coming. And I think that's very much on the horizon now in terms of South Africa's, like, what is our national security going to look like? And is it going to be very much in that identity of remaining with the West, or are we going to move east? And I think there's very big consequences for both. But I know which one I would prefer. That's the one that has fewer lives lost at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a very interesting question. Yeah.
So all eyes now on Dar es Salaam to see if there's any resolution there.
Yes, absolutely. I think, tomorrow will be telling. I'm optimistic, based on what we've heard. It sounds like there might be a result out of that. And hopefully that result is simply the reopening of Goma Airport, the evacuation of our troops from there. And what will probably happen in the coming weeks is we'll maintain our current new staging force in Lubumbashi, and then start asking questions about all of this, hopefully. Yeah, so all eyes tomorrow, and let's hope something comes out of it that's positive. Yeah.
John Stupart, thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.